Military history records actions, loss, and the reality of conflict. Some events do not fit simple explanations, remaining in records and memory as unresolved incidents. The USS Liberty incident is one such case, a subject of debate and questions decades after it happened. On June 8, 1967, in the Mediterranean, this U.S. ship came under attack. Official reports called it a mistake, but survivors and researchers questioned this, pointing to the scale and accuracy of the attack. The event took place during the Six-Day War in the Middle East. On June 5, 1967, Israel launched attacks against Egypt, Jordan, and Syria. Israeli forces moved into the Sinai Peninsula, took the Gaza Strip, and advanced toward the Suez Canal. In this conflict, any foreign military ship faced risk. The waters near Sinai were a war zone, where mistakes or wrong identification could be fatal, leading to the incident that involved two allied countries. The USS Liberty moved slowly in international waters, showing the U.S. presence in the region. It was not built for combat. Its mission was signals intelligence. The crew were technicians, linguists, and analysts, assigned to monitor communications, not to fight. They relied on the U.S. flag and clear ship markings to show their non-combatant status. This belief ended with the attack. The Liberty incident involves diplomacy, military rules, technical issues, and the actions of the crew. It raises questions about alliances, responsibility, and the value of service members' lives in international politics. Why was an intelligence ship near a war zone without protection? Why did it not receive orders to move away? Why did a friendly nation attack a U.S. Navy ship? These questions keep the Liberty incident a debated event in naval history. The USS Liberty, AGTR-5, was a vessel with a unique and clandestine purpose, a fact reflected in its very design and designation. Originally a standard Victory-class cargo ship named the SS Simmons Victory, it was acquired by the U.S. Navy and extensively converted into a technical research ship. This classification was, in essence, a euphemism for its true role as a signals intelligence, or SIGINT, platform operated on behalf of the National Security Agency. The ship was a floating listening post, bristling with a complex and highly visible array of antennas, satellite dishes, and other specialized electronic equipment designed to intercept, monitor, and analyze a wide spectrum of communications. Its mission was to gather intelligence, not to project power, a reality underscored by its minimal defensive armament of just 4 50-caliber machine guns. As the Six-Day War erupted in early June 1967, the Liberty was dispatched from Rota, Spain, to the eastern Mediterranean. Its orders were to proceed to a station in international waters off the coast of the Sinai Peninsula, about 13 nautical miles from the Egyptian town of El Arish. The crew's objective was to monitor the communications of the belligerent nations, particularly those of Egypt and its Soviet advisors. This was a standard intelligence gathering operation, the kind of mission that naval powers conduct routinely around the world. However, the context of an active and unpredictable war made this particular assignment exceptionally dangerous. The ship's captain, Commander William L. McGonigal, was aware of the risks and had reportedly requested a destroyer escort, a request that was ultimately denied by his superiors in the Sixth Fleet. The vulnerability of the Liberty was compounded by a catastrophic failure in the U.S. military's own communication chain. As the conflict escalated and the risks became more apparent, High Command at the Pentagon issued new orders for the Liberty to pull back to a safer distance of at least 100 nautical miles from the coast. In a twist of fate that would have fatal consequences, this critical message was subject to a series of administrative errors and misrouting delays. It was sent through a convoluted path and, astonishingly, did not reach the Liberty until hours after the attack had already occurred. The crew aboard the ship, therefore, operated under the assumption that their position was sanctioned and known to all friendly forces in the area, unaware that their own command was desperately trying to warn them away from the very danger that was about to find them. Thus, the USS Liberty sailed its slow 5-knot patrol pattern under a false sense of security. It was clearly marked as an American vessel. Its hull bore the large white identification number GTR-5, and it flew a standard-sized American flag from its mast. The ship's unique silhouette, dominated by its massive SIGINT antennas, made it visually distinct from any warship in the region, particularly the much smaller Egyptian horse transport, the El Qusayr, which Israel would later claim it was mistaken for. The men on board went about their duties, monitoring the airwaves, confident that the flag of their nation offered them immunity from the conflict raging just over the horizon. They were a ship on a secret errand, but their identity, they believed, was no secret at all. The morning of June 8, 1967, began peacefully for the crew of the USS Liberty. The sea was calm, the visibility was excellent, and the ship continued its slow patrol. Throughout the morning, Israeli military aircraft were a recurring sight. On multiple occasions, beginning hours before the attack, Israeli jets flew over and circled the American vessel. According to the sworn testimony of numerous survivors, these reconnaissance flights were not fleeting or high-altitude passes. The planes came in low and slow, close enough for the American sailors on deck and the Israeli pilots to see each other clearly. Some crew members reported exchanging friendly waves with the pilots, believing these overflights were simply routine procedures for identifying a neutral ship operating near a war zone. This repeated, close-range observation left the crew confident that their identity as an American naval vessel was firmly established. This sense of security was abruptly and violently obliterated at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, local time. Without any warning, the sky turned hostile. A formation of unmarked Mirage 3 and Mystère fighter jets, later confirmed to be from the Israeli Air Force, screamed toward the Liberty and opened fire. The initial assault was a terrifyingly precise and brutal barrage of cannon fire, rockets, and napalm. The Israeli pilots systematically targeted the ship's communications antennas, its command bridge, and its 4 machine gun mounts. The clear objective was to cripple the ship's ability to defend itself or call for help. The napalm bombs ignited furious fires on the deck, trapping and incinerating sailors, while armor-piercing rounds shredded the ship's superstructure, turning a peaceful afternoon into a scene of unimaginable horror and chaos. The attack was relentless. As the first wave of jets completed its devastating passes, the American flag, which had been flying from the main mast, was either shot away or obscured by the thick, acrid smoke pouring from the fires. Crew members, displaying immense courage under fire, scrambled to hoist a new, much larger flag, the ship's so-called holiday colors, in a desperate attempt to signal their identity and stop the onslaught. Meanwhile, radiomen worked frantically in rooms riddled with shrapnel, trying to send a distress signal to the U.S. Sixth Fleet. Their efforts were hampered not only by the destroyed antennas, but also by what survivors described as deliberate electronic jamming of their radio frequencies, a tactic aimed at ensuring the Liberty's complete isolation. In this first phase of the assault, 9 American servicemen were killed and dozens more were horribly wounded. The ship was transformed from a state-of-the-art listening post into a floating inferno, its decks slick with blood and firefighting foam. The crew, though stunned and decimated, fought back with incredible resilience. Sailors formed damage control parties, tended to the wounded with makeshift supplies, and struggled to extinguish the napalm-fueled fires that threatened to consume the entire vessel. The air attack had left the USS Liberty grievously wounded and silenced, but the ordeal for its crew was far from over. A new and even more lethal threat was already approaching from the sea. As the fires from the air attack raged across the deck of the USS Liberty, the second phase of the assault began. 3 Israeli Navy motor torpedo boats, which had been closing in on the ship's position, arrived on the scene. The Liberty, with its signaling capabilities all but destroyed, was unable to properly respond to identification challenges from the approaching vessels. According to the Israeli account, the torpedo boats fired upon the ship after it failed to identify itself, and after a crewman allegedly opened fire on them with a machine gun, an action that survivors vehemently deny and that would have been against the captain's orders. The torpedo boats raked the already battered ship with heavy machine gun and cannon fire, adding to the chaos and casualties. The climax of the naval assault came when one of the Israeli boats, MTB T-203, fired a spread of torpedoes at the crippled American vessel. One of these torpedoes struck the Liberty squarely on its starboard side, directly amidships in the area housing the primary intelligence-gathering spaces. The explosion tore a massive 39-foot hole in the hull, instantly killing 25 more Americans, many of them the NSA technicians and specialists who formed the core of the ship's mission. The blast flooded several compartments, causing the ship to take on a severe list and threatening to send it to the bottom of the Mediterranean. The location and impact of the torpedo strike have since become a major point of contention, as analysts have noted its precision in hitting the ship's most sensitive and vital section. In what is perhaps the most disturbing and controversial allegation made by survivors, the Israeli torpedo boats were accused of machine gunning the life rafts that had been deployed into the water. As sailors lowered the rafts to prepare for a potential abandoned ship order and to rescue men who might have been blown overboard, the approaching boats reportedly opened fire, riddling the rafts with bullets. This action, if true, would constitute a grave violation of international law and the conventions of warfare, which expressly forbid firing on survivors or lifeboats. The memory of seeing their only means of escape being systematically destroyed has remained one of the most searing and painful testimonies for the men who lived through that day. After the torpedo strike, the attack finally subsided. The Israeli boats circled the smoldering, listing hulk of the Liberty. They signaled to the ship, asking, "Do you require assistance?" Commander McGonigal, despite being severely wounded himself, refused the offer. Given the ferocity of the assault he had just endured from those same boats, he was deeply suspicious of their intentions and also keenly aware of the need to protect the sensitive intelligence materials and equipment that remained on board. The crew managed to get the ship under control, contain the flooding, and began the slow, agonizing journey toward Malta, a floating wreck crewed by heroes who had survived 2 hours of hell in the placid waters of the Mediterranean. In the immediate aftermath of the devastating attack, the Israeli government moved quickly to contain the diplomatic fallout. Officials contacted Washington, offering a profound apology and expressing deep regret for the incident. Their official explanation, which has remained Israel's consistent position ever since, was that the attack on the USS Liberty was a tragic and regrettable case of mistaken identity. They claimed their forces had genuinely believed they were engaging an enemy vessel, the Egyptian supply ship El Qasser, which they had been told was operating in the area to shell Israeli positions near the coast. This explanation was subsequently formalized in an official Israeli Court of Inquiry report, which concluded that the incident was the result of a chain of errors and misjudgments made under the intense pressures of war. The Israeli report detailed 3 primary mistakes that it claimed led to the wrongful attack. The first was the reliance on a false report that Israeli forces in the town of El Arish were being shelled from the sea. This report, later found to be an incorrect assessment of explosions at a nearby ammunition dump, created an urgent need for the Israeli military to locate and neutralize a supposed enemy naval threat. This initial error set in motion the entire sequence of events, placing both air and sea units on high alert for an Egyptian warship that did not actually exist in that location. This created a context of heightened tension where a rapid, decisive response was prioritized over cautious identification. The second crucial mistake cited in the Israeli inquiry was an erroneous report from one of their torpedo boat officers regarding the Liberty's speed. The officer reported that the target vessel was steaming at a speed of 30 knots. In reality, the Liberty's maximum speed was only around 18 knots, and at the time of the attack, it was moving at a mere 5 knots. The reported high speed was a critical factor, as it led Israeli commanders to conclude that the ship must be a fast-moving combatant vessel attempting to flee the area, not a slow-moving cargo or intelligence ship. This miscalculation, according to the report, reinforced the initial misidentification and justified the decision to engage with overwhelming force before the supposed enemy could escape. Finally, the Israeli government maintained that poor visibility and conditions at sea contributed to the error. They argued that smoke from the ship's funnels and, later, from the fires caused by the initial airstrikes obscured the ship's markings. They also claimed that the American flag was not clearly visible or had been shot down early in the engagement. According to this narrative, the pilots and torpedo boat crews, acting on flawed intelligence and under the fog of war, simply did not see the hull numbers or the flag that would have identified the ship as American. Combined, these 3 points, the false shelling report, the incorrect speed assessment, and the alleged poor visibility of markings, formed the foundation of Israel's official explanation that the attack was a terrible accident, not a deliberate act of aggression. The official Israeli explanation of a tragic mistake stands in stark and dramatic contrast to the collective memory of the men who survived the attack. For decades, the veterans of the USS Liberty have insisted that the mistaken identity narrative is impossible to reconcile with what they witnessed firsthand. One of the most powerful points of contention is the issue of identification. Survivors are adamant that their ship was clearly and unmistakably marked. It was a clear, sunny day with excellent visibility. The ship's hull displayed large, freshly painted identification numbers, and it was flying the American flag. After the first flag was damaged, an even larger one was hoisted, a desperate act that they believe could not have been missed by the low-flying jets or the nearby torpedo boats. Furthermore, the physical differences between the USS Liberty and the Egyptian ship it was supposedly mistaken for, the El Qasir, are so profound that survivors and naval experts alike find the claim of confusion implausible. The Liberty was more than double the size of the El Qasir and had a completely different silhouette. The American ship's most prominent feature was its massive and unique array of SIGINT antennas and a large satellite dish, features that the small Egyptian horse transport entirely lacked. To mistake one for the other, critics argue, would be akin to mistaking a large commercial bus for a small passenger car. This glaring discrepancy has fueled the belief that the attackers knew exactly what ship they were targeting. The nature of the attack itself also raises serious questions that challenge the official narrative. Survivors describe a methodical and prolonged assault lasting nearly 2 hours, aimed at completely destroying the ship and killing its entire crew. The initial airstrikes precisely targeted the ship's communications equipment, a tactic designed to prevent it from calling for help. The subsequent alleged machine gunning of life rafts in the water is seen by many as evidence of an intent to leave no witnesses. Additionally, analysis of the torpedo strike showed that the weapon was set to a running depth that was optimal for the deep hull of the Liberty, but would have likely passed underneath the much shallower draft of the El Qasir, suggesting a level of foreknowledge about the specific target. Perhaps the most compelling evidence comes from intercepted communications. Senior radio intercept officers on the Liberty, along with reports from other listening posts in the region, have claimed to have overheard Israeli pilots identifying the ship as American before the attack was launched, only to be ordered by their ground control to proceed. This explosive claim, supported by testimony from some former intelligence personnel, directly refutes the core of the Israeli explanation. For the survivors, these pieces of evidence, the clear markings, the distinct profile of their ship, the calculated nature of the assault, and the intercepted communications, form an irrefutable case that the attack was no accident, but a deliberate and intentional act of aggression. The controversy surrounding the USS Liberty incident was not confined to the enlisted survivors and junior officers. From the very beginning, deep skepticism about the mistaken identity explanation existed at the highest levels of the United States government and military. While the official U.S. position, cemented by the Navy's Court of Inquiry, largely accepted the Israeli apology and concluded the attack was a result of error, many influential figures privately and later publicly expressed their profound disbelief. They found the notion that Israel's highly professional and skilled military could make such a colossal blunder to be simply incredible, particularly given the circumstances of the clear weather and repeated reconnaissance. One of the most prominent skeptics was Dean Rusk, who was the U.S. Secretary of State at the time of the incident. In his memoirs, published years later, Rusk was blunt in his assessment. He stated that he never believed the Israeli explanation and was convinced the attack was deliberate. He recalled the anger and disbelief within the State Department and the White House, even as the official decision was made to publicly accept Israel's apology for broader geopolitical reasons. Rusk's perspective is significant because it reveals a sharp divergence between the public posture of the U.S. government and the private convictions of its most senior diplomat, suggesting that political expediency triumphed over a full and transparent investigation into the deaths of American servicemen. This sentiment was echoed even more forcefully within the military establishment. Admiral Thomas Moore, who was the chief of naval operations at the time of the attack and later became chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, was perhaps the most outspoken high-ranking critic of the official story. For decades after his retirement, Moore campaigned for a new congressional investigation, calling the attack a dastardly act and the subsequent handling of it a national disgrace. He co-chaired an independent commission of inquiry, which concluded that the attack was a deliberate attempt to sink the ship, and that the White House had actively engaged in a cover-up to protect its relationship with Israel. Moore's unwavering stance gave significant weight to the survivors' claims, as it came from the highest echelons of the U.S. Navy. Another deeply troubling aspect that fueled official doubts was the mysterious recall of American rescue aircraft. Upon receiving the Liberty's distress signal, the U.S. Sixth Fleet launched fighter jets from the aircraft carriers USS Saratoga and USS America to defend the ship. In a move that has never been fully and satisfactorily explained, these rescue flights were recalled by direct orders from Washington, allegedly from Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara. This unprecedented decision to abandon an American naval vessel while it was actively under attack has been interpreted by many, including officials involved at the time, as a political choice to avoid a direct military confrontation with Israeli forces, even at the cost of American lives. This recall remains one of the most painful and inexplicable parts of the entire affair. In the wake of the attack, the immediate focus was on saving the ship and caring for the wounded. The heavily damaged USS Liberty, against all odds, managed to stay afloat and limp its way to Malta for emergency repairs, shadowed by both American and Soviet vessels. The human cost was staggering. 34 Americans were killed and 171 were wounded, representing a casualty rate of over 70% of the 293-man crew. In recognition of their extraordinary bravery and resilience, the crew of the Liberty received the Presidential Unit Citation. Captain William L. McGonigal was awarded the Medal of Honor for his heroic leadership while grievously wounded, and numerous other crew members received silver and bronze stars for their valor under fire. The diplomatic aftermath was handled with a focus on preserving the critical U.S.-Israeli alliance, a cornerstone of American foreign policy in the Middle East. Despite the private outrage and skepticism of many officials, the Johnson administration publicly accepted Israel's apology and its explanation of mistaken identity. The official U.S. Navy Court of Inquiry, conducted hastily and with limited scope, concluded that the attack was a case of gross negligence, but not premeditated. Survivors have long contended that this investigation was a whitewash, alleging they were pressured into silence, threatened with court-martial if they spoke to the media, and that their testimonies were altered or omitted from the final report to align with the official narrative. As part of its apology, the State of Israel paid monetary compensation to the victims and to the U.S. government. In 1968 and 1969, Israel paid approximately $7 million to the families of the 34 men who were killed and to the 171 who were wounded. It took more than a decade longer for a final settlement on the material damage to the ship itself. In 1980, Israel paid an additional $6 million for the loss of the Liberty, which had been deemed too damaged for economical repair and was eventually sold for scrap in 1973. While the financial payments were made, for the survivors and the families of the fallen, no amount of money could ever truly compensate for the loss of life, the physical and psychological trauma, or the lingering sense of betrayal. The handling of the incident had a lasting, though often unspoken, impact on the U.S.-Israel relationship. For proponents of the alliance, it was a tragic but isolated incident that was properly resolved through diplomacy and compensation, demonstrating the strength of the bond between the two nations. For critics, however, the Liberty affair set a dangerous precedent. They argue it showed that the U.S. government was willing to subordinate justice for its own service members to overarching strategic interests, effectively granting a degree of impunity to a key ally. This perception has fueled decades of debate and has made the USS Liberty a powerful and enduring symbol for those who question the unconditional nature of the U.S.-Israeli partnership. More than 5 decades after the smoke cleared and the last shot was fired, the USS Liberty incident remains an open wound in American naval history. It endures not merely as a tragic memory, but as a persistent and deeply polarizing controversy. The fundamental question, was the attack a horrific accident born from the fog of war, or was it a deliberate act of aggression, continues to be debated with fierce passion. The official conclusion of both the United States and Israeli governments is that it was a mistake. Yet, this conclusion has failed to satisfy the men who survived the ordeal, a growing number of former military officials, and a public that remains captivated by the case's many inconsistencies. The legacy of the event is defined by the unresolved questions that hang over it like a shroud. Why were repeated, low-level reconnaissance flights by Israeli pilots insufficient to identify the ship as American? How could experienced military professionals mistake the unique, massive profile of the Liberty for a small Egyptian transport? Why was the attack so sustained and aimed at the ship's total destruction, including its communications and life rafts? And perhaps most disturbingly, why were American rescue planes recalled by Washington while their countrymen were under fire? The absence of clear, convincing, and officially sanctioned answers to these questions has created a vacuum that has been filled with suspicion and theories of a high-level cover-up. This enduring mystery has cemented the Liberty's place in a sensitive and often volatile discourse about American foreign policy and the nature of its alliances. The story is frequently invoked in debates about U.S.-Israeli relations, serving as a cautionary tale for some and an uncomfortable footnote for others. For the survivors, their decades-long quest has been for something they feel has been denied to them, a full, independent, and public congressional investigation that puts all the evidence on the record and holds individuals and nations accountable. They seek not to sever an alliance, but to honor their fallen shipmates with the truth, whatever that truth may be. Ultimately, the USS Liberty incident serves as a powerful and somber reminder of the complexities that lie beneath the surface of international relations and the human cost of geopolitical strategy. It is a story of immense heroism in the face of overwhelming odds and a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. But it is also a stark lesson in the fallibility of systems, the ambiguities of warfare, and the painful reality that sometimes the clearest answers are the hardest to come by. The scar it left on history has not faded with time. Instead, it remains a solemn monument to 34 American lives lost and a call for reflection on the enduring pursuit of truth and accountability.